All right, let's talk about sustainability. For years, it's been about big promises, but now the game has completely changed. It's about proof. Today, we're going to decode what this really means for one of the most important industries on the entire planet, agriculture.
So it all boils down to this one simple, but really tough question. How do you actually put a number on something like sustainability? Well, what we're seeing is this massive global shift away from these vague feel-good statements and toward hard, comparable data. We're turning environmental and social impact into numbers that investors, regulators, and you can actually understand and compare.
Okay, here's our game plan for today. We'll kick things off with the big picture of this new reporting era. Then, we're going to connect two key frameworks. That's IFRS and SASB. After that, we'll dive deep into the specific standard for agriculture, see a couple of key metrics in action, and wrap it all up with why any of this really matters.
So let's jump right in. All around the world, sustainability reporting is going from a nice-to-have to a must-do. It's becoming mandatory. And look, this isn't just some passing trend. It's a fundamental change in how companies talk about their value, and there are a couple of key players really driving this whole thing forward.
So who's in charge of all of this? Well, at the very top, you have the IFRS Foundation. Now, if that name sounds familiar, it's because they're the same people who set the global standards for financial accounting. Now they're doing the same thing for sustainability, creating a single global baseline. And that's a huge deal because it aims to make this information just as reliable and consistent as the financial numbers we're all used to.
So how'd they do it? They've rolled out these two foundational standards. First, you've got IFRS S1. Think of this as the main rulebook. It sets the general requirements for reporting on all sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Then you have IFRS S2, which gets laser-focused on one of the biggest risks out there, climate change. Put them together, and you've got this incredibly powerful framework. But you might be wondering, how does a big global company in a really specific field, like agriculture, actually use these broad rules? This is where the SASB standards come into play. Honestly, the best way to think about the relationship between IFRS and SASB is like a Rosetta Stone for sustainability reporting. This quote absolutely nails it. IFRS sets those big, high-level requirements. It says, you must report on your climate risks. But then SASB comes in and provides the detailed industry-specific playbook. It tells an agricultural company exactly how to do that, pointing to the specific metrics that matter most for their business. Okay, so the key thing to get here is that these two systems are totally designed to work together. In fact, IFRS S1 literally tells companies to consider the SASB standards to figure out their risks and metrics. So when the rubber meets the road, a company uses its SASB industry standard as the practical tool to find the exact data points it needs to satisfy those broader IFRS requirements.
So you can see how this all stacks up, right? It's a really logical flow. First, you get the big mandate from IFRS. Step 2, a company grabs the SASB standard for its industry to identify what's actually important. And finally, Step 3, it uses those specific SASB metrics to measure and report on its performance. It's a clear path from the 30,000-foot view right down to the nitty-gritty details.
Okay, so let's get specific ourselves and zoom right in on the agricultural products industry. This standard is built for the companies that process, trade, and distribute all the things we eat, from grains and sugar to fruits and vegetables. I mean, just look at the breadth of what's considered financially material here. It's not just the obvious stuff like emissions. We're talking about everything from water use and food safety to how you treat your workers and the integrity of your supply chain. Every single one of these topics has a direct, tangible link to a company's financial performance. All right, enough theory. Let's see what this looks like in the real world. We're going to pull out two high-impact topics from the standard to understand exactly what companies have to measure and report on. First up, water management. And this is a huge one, right? For an industry that is so incredibly dependent on water, risks like drought, new regulations, and just plain scarcity, well, those aren't just environmental issues. They are fundamental business risks, plain and simple. So, how do you put a number on that risk? Well, one of the key metrics is this one. It measures the percentage of a company's total water consumption that comes from regions already facing high or extremely high water stress. It's a direct way to quantify a company's vulnerability to water scarcity. So a company might report a number like this, 40%. Now, that's not just a statistic. If 40% of a company's water is coming from places that are prone to drought, that single number tells investors an incredibly powerful story about potential supply chain breakdowns, rising costs, and the real-world resilience of that business.
Next up, let's look at greenhouse gas emissions. This connects directly back to that big IFRS S2 climate standard we talked about. We're going to focus on what's known as Scope 1 emissions. Basically, these are the direct emissions from sources a company owns or controls. Think of the fuel being burned in its processing plants or its fleet of trucks.
The math here is actually pretty simple, at least in theory. You take your activity data, say how many gallons of diesel fuel your factory used last year, and you multiply it by a standardized emission factor. That calculation converts your activity into a total carbon footprint, which is measured in tons of CO2 equivalent.
So a company might run the numbers and find its direct emissions are, say, 694 tons of CO2 equivalent. But again, this isn't just a number for some dusty report. It's a critical baseline. It allows that company to set real, meaningful reduction targets, to manage the risks from new climate regulations, and to prove its progress to investors.
Okay, so let's zoom back out. We've been in the weeds with frameworks and metrics, but let's connect it all back to the big question. Why does this all matter? What's the real-world impact of all this data? Well, for investors, these numbers peel back the curtain and reveal hidden risks and opportunities. For the companies themselves, this data is a powerful strategic tool for building a tougher, more efficient, and more resilient business. And for all of us, it drives the kind of transparency we need to finally see which companies are truly walking the talk on sustainability.
And that brings us to our final thought. For the first time, we really have a standardized language to measure and compare sustainability's performance. The question is no longer if companies will report this data, but how well they manage what the data tells them. Because the companies that master this new language won't just be better reporters, they'll be the ones leading the future of our entire global food system.